Our next speaker, I'm glad and excited to introduce. His name is Max Heffler, and he will be the first speaker that will be giving their advanced communicator speech. Now, Max has been a network architect for Canrick for nearly 4 years. He has performed similar roles at ExxonMobil and Chevron for many years before joining Canrick. He received his bachelor's and master's in electrical engineering from Rice University. In his spare time and his hobbies, he includes exercise, genetic genealogy, playing keyboards, and singing in a band, and singing in a choir and weekly retirement for it. And singing in a choir and weekly for a retirement home. Max is married and is the father of 3 daughters, and is the Mission Possible Safety Team leader and the secretary and treasurer for our club. Everybody, please give a big round of applause.
Thank you, Mr. Toastmaster. Fellow Toastmasters and distinguished guests. The title of my speech is Massa, HaHarpatka'ot, HaRishon Yisrael, or my first journey to and adventures in Israel. When I was 15, after I was confirmed, my parents had offered me a trip to Israel, and I rejected it because I said, my life is here, where my band is here, my girlfriend's here, what do I want to go for? Before I met my wife, she had been, and my daughter did a summer program there, and so it was my turn. So I'm going to explain my journey in 3 separate steps. The journey to Israel, the 13 days I spent in Israel, and the journey back home. The flight up was relatively uneventful for the first leg. I went through Toronto, and then when I got to, the second leg from Toronto to Israel was pretty eventful. There was 10.5 hours of baby crying, about a row or 2 ahead of me, a boy throwing up in the seat ahead of me a couple of times, which was a lovely smell. His father trying to teach him Sudoku while I was trying to sleep. And then when I got to the baggage claim in Tel Aviv, I found out my luggage decided to stay another day in Toronto. Eventually made my way to the hotel, checked in, and saw some friends who were getting ready to go on a tunnel tour. So I tagged along with them, even though I was in the same clothes, since my luggage was there for 2.5 days with no deodorant and toothpaste. But it was quite interesting to take the tunnel tour along the exposed part here of the tunnel, and then the part that's underneath the Muslim Quarter. Then the conference began. It was roughly 4.5 days worth of topics, different talks on 5 different tracks. And along the way, the evenings, we went to downtown Jerusalem for dinner. I was not expecting the street performers, so that was quite an interesting experience. On the second day of the conference, I got to meet my 5th cousin, who I've been collaborating with for 5 years, almost 15 years, and I'd only met her before on Skype, probably almost 15 years ago. And then the next day, I also got to meet a probable cousin, a unique surname from the same town, and we don't know how we connect yet, but I did have her take a DNA test while we're there, so I think the results have just come in. That'll be interesting to find out what's going on. And then we've all taken the DNA test, and we're all Levites from that same line, Eastern European origin. So this was a dinner we had with some interesting, trying to map the common ancestor of the different people. Also at the conference, I met a person I've been volunteering web creation work for better part of 10 to 15 years, and I only had met him over Skype before, so it was rather interesting. The last night of the conference, they had a banquet, and we had quite an international table. There were people here from Scotland, from Canada, from South Africa, San Francisco, New York. It was quite interesting. The next day, I sort of skipped the final things at the conference because it was more fun tagging along to the Yad Vashem Museum with some of my friends here. It was hot, but quite enjoyable. It was because it was higher elevation in the hills mountains. It was not humid. The following day, we went to Massa. A person that I had tried to connect with, whose rabbinical line through DNA didn't pan out, but he still kept touch, and we still became friends. He drove in and took us and showed us Masada and then the Dead Sea. And we were having a great time until I got the water in my eyes and had to be led like the blind to the showers to rinse the water out of my eyes.
Just a little salty.
The last day we were in Jerusalem, Nancy and I, a friend from the conference, toured the old city of Jerusalem. And it was amazing to watch her. I had to shut my mouth and watch her, the master negotiator, as she worked down the price for the hat and the sunglasses that I had purchased. And again, got to go to the Wailing Wall, this time up to the wall, be on the top side and actually touch it, and it was very spiritual. And then took a cab to the second half of the trip in Tel Aviv. The first evening there, or first day there, we went to the art museum and spent an hour or two in seeing the art. And that evening we went back for a musical here, You Won't Succeed on Broadway If You Don't Have Any Jews, which I had seen the movie years before at a previous conference, but this crew from London was amazing. The talent, the singing was wonderful. The next day, Omri, my friend who had taken us to Massa and the Dead Sea, came in and gave us a tour of Tel Aviv. He took us to Old Jaffa. This was a converted railway station that we had lunch in, and my first glimpse of the Mediterranean at the port of Tel Aviv. And then he just took us rowing on the Yarkon River, and there were plenty of, when we went back to the port to swim, there were lots of jellyfish, and Nancy got stung. But the next day, we went and spent at least 4 hours again, and she went back into the water, and this time she didn't get stung, but she was trying to save the jellyfish. It was kind of crazy. And then after that, we went to tour the old city of Jaffa. And you can see in the bottom, you're looking at Tel Aviv and the Mediterranean from the old city of Jaffa that's right adjacent to it. The next to last night, my first cousin's daughter came in and took me to dinner. I hadn't seen her probably in 20 years. And the final night, my wife's cousin came in and took me to dinner. This was during Ramadan, and it was very interesting to see how this restaurant filled up with the Arabs at sunset, and then they filed out and it filled up with Jews. And it was interesting to see it all just, it was just a different, it was interesting. And this was prophetic. It was sort of a metaphor for my trip. As my trip was winding to an end, the sun was setting on the Mediterranean. So I got to see all the sights I wanted to see, perhaps half of the people I wanted to see due to the lack of time and the not getting a SIM card, which I know the international calling I had was too expensive, so I didn't use it. On the flight back, I thought I had plenty of time, and then found out due to mechanical problems the flight was delayed for 4 hours, so I missed a connecting flight. But I did get to see this movie, The Woman in Gold. It was about a friend of mine who did won an art restitution case. I just left him at the conference. I see him every year. And then because my connecting flight was missed, I had to stay overnight in Newark. Got up about 2 a.m. to make a 5 a.m. flight back to Houston. And then, of course, the luggage was delayed, so I only got to be about an hour of my hour and a half deep tissue massage, which I sorely needed. So I told you about the 3 phases of my trip: the journey to Israel, the 13 days I spent there, and then the final leg back home. And my conclusions were the 13 days there way outweighed the 2 trips from hell, the flights from hell. And as I mentioned in the title, Massa, HaHarpatka'ot, HaRishon, Sheli, Israel, my first journey to Israel. I certainly hope this is not my last. Thank you.